I've learned that some betrayals don't arrive like storms. They seep in slowly, quietly, through the cracks of a family you once believed was unbreakable. And when they finally show their face, you're left wondering how long the hand that stabbed you had been preparing the knife. My name is Evelyn, and I'm 43 years old. I learned the meaning of betrayal not from strangers, not from enemies, but from the person who shared my childhood bedroom, my secrets, my mother's recipes, and the long, lonely nights after our father died. My sister, Claire. Even saying her name now brings a strange weight to my chest, like pressing on a bruise that still hasn't fully healed. I used to think she was the one person in this world who would stand beside me no matter what. We weren't just sisters, we were survivors. Daughters of a hardworking mother and a father who loved us fiercely, until the day his heart simply stopped. I was 21 then. Claire was 19. And we were both too young to understand how quickly life can shift from normal to, you're on your own now. Maybe that's where everything truly began. Our mother was strong, but she wasn't prepared to raise us alone, while juggling the collapsing finances my father left behind. Not because he was irresponsible, but because he believed he would have more time. He was only 53. I remember kneeling beside his hospital bed, too shocked to cry, feeling my fingers go numb as I touched his cold hand, whispering that I'd take care of Mom and Claire no matter how hard it became. And I meant it. Every word. That promise became the backbone of my 20s and 30s. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I took care of the house, the bills, the documents, the taxes. I made every choice with the same quiet mantra: keep the family together. Make sure Claire never struggles the way you did. But promises made under grief have a way of turning into chains, and eventually, they leave the door wide open for someone else to take advantage of them. I didn't realize how much resentment had been building inside Claire while I was busy trying to shield her from the storms. She always wanted the bigger life, the spotlight, the stage, the recognition, and she got it. She was popular, beautiful, charismatic. People gravitated to her naturally. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. The planner, the protector, the background character in my own life. And for a long time, I didn't mind. I thought that's what love looked like. The real trouble began when Mom started showing signs of memory loss. Small things at first: misplaced keys, forgotten appointments, leaving the stove on. But then the confusion worsened. She would call me at work, panicked, insisting she'd heard intruders in the house. I would rush over only to find her trembling in the kitchen, unable to remember why she picked up the phone. I was 37 then. Claire was 35. She had just started gaining a little fame from her talk show appearances segments about living boldly and embracing your power. I still remember watching her on TV, smiling brightly, giving advice to strangers while I struggled to manage Mom's medications at home. People adored her confidence. They had no idea that the person she preached empowerment to the loudest was herself. One night, after Mom had wandered out of the house for the 3rd time in a week, I confronted Claire. I told her we needed to make decisions, real decisions about Mom's care, about the house, about the future we could no longer pretend wasn't coming. She listened, or at least she pretended to. That was the beginning of a long conversation that would spiral into something I could never have predicted. At first, she was supportive. She said she understood. She said she wanted to help. She said she was ready to share the burden. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I was exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. For the first time, my sister stepped forward and said, "Let me handle the paperwork. Ev, you've done enough." And I let her. That was my first mistake. The documents she presented a few weeks later looked legitimate. She said they were estate planning forms, advance directives, things Mom needed to sign while her memory was still clear enough. I read through them the best I could after another sleepless night of watching over Mom. And everything seemed reasonable, at least at the time. Claire's voice was soothing, reassuring, steady. She told me she had consulted with professionals. She told me she was protecting all of us. But there's a difference between protecting a family and taking control of it. And buried beneath the legal jargon, so casually, so cleverly, was a clause giving Claire temporary management authority over the property and finances until Mom passed. A clause that could be and eventually was extended. A clause that granted rights she never should have had. A clause that I signed because I trusted the girl who once cried in my arms over scraped knees and broken hearts. That signature would become the weapon she used to destroy everything I had spent years holding together. But I didn't know that then. I only knew I was tired. That was all the justification my mind needed to hand over the pen and tell her, "Okay, Claire, let's do this together." The months that followed were a blur of taking Mom to appointments, soothing her fears, managing her anxiety, and quietly falling apart inside as I watched the woman who had raised us slowly fade away. But through all of it, Claire was strangely absent. She always had a new event, a new appearance, a new opportunity that could change everything if she didn't seize it. Every time she canceled on me, she sounded so apologetic, so guilty, so sincere, and I convinced myself that she was trying her best. I convinced myself of many things back then. Mom died on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. She passed quietly, holding my hand, her eyes unfocused but peaceful. I whispered that I loved her, and that she didn't need to be afraid anymore. Claire arrived 2 hours later, sunglasses covering her red eyes, though I wasn't sure whether she had been crying or simply didn't want people to recognize her in public. The funeral was small, intimate, just the way Mom would have wanted. I gave a eulogy that I barely remember delivering. After the burial, Claire hugged me and told me we would handle everything as a team. I thought maybe grief had softened her, given her perspective. I thought maybe I had my sister back. But grief doesn't change people. It reveals them. And the reveal came only a few weeks later. I found out through a phone call from the bank. Imagine that. A stranger's voice delivering the kind of blow that nearly knocked the breath from my lungs, that the house I had spent years maintaining, the home filled with my father's favorite books and my mother's old perfume, had been transferred to Claire's name, per the authorized management agreement. The agreement, the contract, the one she had guided me to sign. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, the cold tiles numbing my legs, staring at the stack of papers I had trusted her with. How could I have missed it? How could she have done this? The betrayal was so sharp, so complete, that I couldn't even cry at first. It was as if my body didn't know how to process the blow. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and triumph and said, "Ev, you've always been too emotional to handle responsibilities like this." Responsibilities. As if stealing our mother's home was an act of duty. As if betrayal could be justified by calling it management. I stood there, shaking, my voice cracking as I demanded she undo it. But she didn't budge. Instead, she delivered the line that would haunt me for months. "You signed the contract. Ev, you gave this to me." The shock was so deep that it felt like my lungs refused to expand. That was the first moment I realized Claire wasn't just selfish. She was dangerous. And she had just begun. In the days after that confrontation, I moved through the world like a ghost trapped inside my own life. Every room in the house felt different. Colder somehow. As if Claire's name on the deed had altered the atmosphere itself. I kept replaying her words. "You signed the contract. You gave this to me." There was a venomous truth in them. One that wrapped itself around my ribs and squeezed every time I tried to breathe. She wasn't wrong. I had signed. I had trusted her. I had let exhaustion blind me. And now I was paying the price for a mistake I didn't even realize I'd made. For a while, I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, there was a misunderstanding, that Claire wasn't trying to hurt me, that she had acted impulsively, not maliciously. I clung to that hope like a woman drowning in an ocean of denial, because the alternative meant accepting that my own flesh and blood had betrayed me intentionally, calculatingly, and without hesitation. But hope is fragile. It doesn't take much for it to shatter. The real unraveling began 2 weeks later, when Claire went public on live television, a home improvement special, a celebration, as she called it, a segment dedicated to her new journey as a homeowner, where she proudly announced to the entire state that she had inherited our mother's house and was planning a massive renovation to honor her legacy. I watched the broadcast from my living room, the one I had cleaned, maintained, and protected for years. Claire was glowing on the screen, wearing a pale peach blazer and her signature confident smile. She spoke about how she had been entrusted with managing the family estate after our mother's passing. She spoke about how she had stepped up when things got difficult. She even spoke about me, except she twisted the narrative so severely that I didn't recognize myself in her words. "My sister, Evelyn, is incredibly generous," she said with a soft laugh. placing a manicured hand over her heart. She didn't want the burden of caring for the house. She insisted that I take full responsibility. And she even signed a contract saying so. Honestly, I'm so grateful she trusted me to protect our family home. Generous. Insisted. Trusted. I felt the blood rush to my face, my hands trembling around the remote. She had taken my exhaustion, my grief, and my trust and twisted them into a televised story of her own heroism. She was painting me as the sister who stepped aside willingly, who handed her the keys out of kindness. Not because she manipulated me during the worst year of my life, and people loved it. They flooded her with praise online, comments about how inspiring she was, how selfless, how devoted to family. Meanwhile, I sat alone in the house that was no longer legally mine, feeling like the air had been punched out of my lungs. Hate isn't the right word for what I felt. It was deeper, raw, bitter disbelief, mixed with the burning shame of being exposed, twisted, and displayed like an accessory to her fabricated virtue. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. By the third morning, something inside me snapped. Not violently, not loudly, but quietly, like the last fiber of a rope finally giving way under years of strain. I needed answers. Real ones. Not from Claire. She had already shown me who she was. I needed answers from the documents themselves. So I dug them out, the forms, the agreements, the pages I had skimmed when my mother was declining and my world was collapsing. I spread everything across the dining table, surrounded by the ghost of every memory tied to that house. And I read, slowly this time, carefully, every line, every clause, every footnote. And the more I read, the sicker I felt. Buried deep within the legal language were clauses that went far beyond temporary management. Clauses that granted Claire rights not only to the property but to the savings account Mom had held privately, to the insurance payout, and even to certain investment accounts our father had left behind years earlier, accounts I didn't even know still existed. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. And she had executed it flawlessly. At one point, I pressed my forehead against the cool wooden edge of the table, fighting the urge to scream. How had I been so blind? How had I let her get this far? But there was no time to drown in self-blame. My mother's belongings were still in the house. My father's journals, their wedding photos, the carved wooden jewelry box my grandfather had made by hand. These were things Claire would throw out without hesitation in the name of renovation. My hands shook as I boxed everything up carefully. Reverently, I packed until my back ached and my knees throbbed. Every folded blanket, every framed picture, every book filled me with a mixture of grief and a strange, stubborn protectiveness. These weren't just objects. They were the last pieces of the family I had lost long before Claire decided to take what remained. By evening, I had filled my car with boxes. I didn't know where I would put them. My apartment wasn't ready yet. I hadn't even started looking, but leaving these memories in Claire's possession felt like betraying my parents all over again. So I drove to a storage facility and rented the smallest unit they had. I didn't even care that it was overpriced. I told myself it was temporary. A temporary retreat while I figured out what to do next. But the next blow came sooner than I expected. I returned home, if I could still call it that, to find Claire standing in the driveway with 2 cameramen and a contractor. She was mid-sentence, giving them a tour of the future renovation site, waving her arms dramatically as if she had been born for the spotlight. When she saw me, her smile tightened slightly. But she didn't stop talking. She simply stepped aside and gestured at the entryway, saying something about restructuring the living space for better flow. The living space I grew up in. The space where my father taught me how to read. Where my mother spent her Sundays kneading bread dough. Where Claire and I decorated our first Christmas tree after Dad died. And she wanted better flow. The cameras turned to me as I stepped out of the car. My clothes were wrinkled, my face still swollen from crying. I must have looked like a ghost next to her immaculate appearance. Claire gave me a sweet, artificial smile, the kind that could cut deeper than cruelty. "Oh, Ev," she said softly. "I thought you'd be at work. We're filming. Don't worry. We'll stay out of your way." My way. In my home. Something inside me burned. Not hot and furious, but cold and precise. "I need to speak with you," I said. She tilted her head, still performing for the camera. "Of course. But maybe later. We're on a schedule." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Now, The cameramen sensed the tension immediately. One of them discreetly lowered the lens. The other looked uncertain. Claire sighed dramatically. The perfect martyr. And told them to take a break. As soon as they stepped away, she turned to me with a look that could only be described as irritation wrapped in condescension. What is it now? Ev. What you're doing, I whispered, is wrong. Oh, please. She scoffed, crossing her arms. Don't start with the morality speech. Everything I've done is legal. You signed the papers. You allowed this. Allowed. That word again. You manipulated me. I said. You knew I was drowning and you used it. She didn't even deny it. Life rewards the people who seize opportunities, she replied calmly, not the ones who collapse under pressure. And this house, my voice cracked, this was our home. Claire. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked bored. It was falling apart. Ev, you were falling apart. Someone had to step up. I stared at her, feeling like I no longer recognized the girl I once protected, the girl who used to slip her hand into mine during thunderstorms, the girl I defended from bullies, the girl I cooked birthday cakes for when Mom forgot. Where had she gone? When had she become this person? Then she delivered the final blow. You should start packing soon. The renovation starts next month. The world tilted. You're evicting me. It's not eviction, she said, shrugging. It's transition. You need a fresh start anyway. Fresh start. As if she was doing me a favor. I didn't remember walking away. I didn't remember getting back into my car. All I remember is the sound of Claire's laughter behind me, the same laugh she used to share with me on late nights over cheap wine and old movies. Except now it felt like a weapon. That night, sitting alone in a rented motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, I realized something I never thought I'd admit. My sister didn't just betray me. She erased me. She rewrote the story of our family. She erased my sacrifices. She erased my role. She erased my worth. And she did it with a pen and a smile. I knew then that the woman on TV wasn't the real Claire. The real Claire was someone far darker. Someone driven by ambition so sharp, it carved everything in its way, including me. That night, as the motel's old heater hummed quietly, a new resolve began to take shape inside me. A cold, steady flame. Not rage. Not grief. Revenge. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that restores what was stolen. And I promised myself that I would make her face everything she had done. Everything she thought she had gotten away with. In the days that followed, revenge didn't feel like fire. It felt like focus dangerously calm. Painfully clear. For the first time in months. Maybe years. My thoughts were sharp. Uncluttered by grief or guilt. I woke up each morning in that cramped motel room, with a single truth echoing through me like a heartbeat. Claire thinks she's already won. She believes I'm broken. She believes I'm done. And that belief was her greatest weakness. I had spent my entire life cleaning up her messes, protecting her from consequences, softening every hard edge in her path. She had no idea what I was capable of when I finally stopped cushioning her world. The first step wasn't confrontation. It wasn't threats. It wasn't exposing her publicly the way she had publicly rewritten our story. No, I knew Claire better than anyone else. She thrived on attention. She lived off image. Her world was built not on truth, but on perception, to destroy her. I needed to strike the foundation she valued most, the persona she had carefully crafted. But I also knew I couldn't do it recklessly. Her public image was a fortress built on charisma, connections, and curated charm. One wrong move, and she would spin it as another act of her supposed strength. No. I needed evidence. Cold, indéniable, inarguable. Evidence she couldn't manipulate with a smile or a press interview. I began with the documents again. Not the ones she gave me, those were carefully doctored, but the ones I still had access to. Bank statements, old letters, tax forms, notes from my mother's doctors, and eventually, after following a trail Claire probably never expected me to understand, I found something shocking: inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that were too perfect. Authorization forms submitted on days when my mother had been hospitalized, heavily sedated, incapable of coherent consent. My hands shook as I pieced it together. Claire hadn't just exploited the contract I signed. She had forged additional permissions using Mom's signature. And not years ago, months before she died. The discovery nearly brought me to my knees. I pressed my palms to the motel's worn carpet, breathing hard, feeling the weight of everything I had missed crashing down over me. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Exploitation. Deception layered on. Deception. She had taken advantage of our mother's illness in ways I didn't want to imagine. She had crossed a line I didn't think even Claire, with all her ambition and vanity, could ever cross. But there it was in ink. In dates. In signatures my mother couldn't have written. I needed more. So I did something I never imagined myself doing. I went back to the house. Not through the front door. Not during the day. Claire had cameras installed by then, security for her renovation project. She'd called it on social media. But Claire also had a fatal flaw. She always underestimated me. She assumed I would avoid the house out of pain. Not strategy. She assumed I was too devastated to think clearly. She forgot that I grew up in that house too. I knew every creaking floorboard, every loose window latch, every blind spot in the yard, long before security cameras ever existed. So, under the cover of dusk, wearing a dark hoodie and gloves, I slipped through the backyard and into the old storage shed. One Claire never bothered to renovate because cameras couldn't capture anything aesthetically pleasing there. The shed had a secondary door, a warped, half-broken slab of wood that led directly into the laundry room, a hidden connection our father built years ago, so he could store tools without carrying them around the house. Claire didn't remember it. She never helped Dad with home repairs. She was always too busy rehearsing her lines or practicing her on-camera smile. But I remembered. The door groaned softly as I opened it. And I froze. Listening. No movement. No footsteps. Just the low hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the old wall clock. Inside, the house was exactly the same and entirely different. Claire's perfume lingered in the air, expensive. Sharp. Suffocating. Her designer coat hung on the back of a chair, and on the dining table, scattered like a deck of cards, lay her renovation plans, design boards, and press notes. But what caught my attention wasn't the glossy renderings of open-concept kitchens or sleek marble countertops. It was a folder labeled Estate Consolidation Postmortem Transfers. My stomach tightened. Carefully. I opened it. More documents. More forged signatures. More proof of Claire's manipulation. And then, at the very bottom of the stack, a letter, one I recognized immediately by the handwriting. My mother's handwriting. But something was off. The loops in her letters were too steady, the lines too straight. The date of the letter was 3 weeks after her neurologist officially recorded her advanced cognitive decline. She couldn't have written it. Tears blurred my vision as I held the paper. It was like touching the ghost of my mother's stolen voice. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling a grief so sharp it made my ribs ache. Mom didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to have her last months twisted into a tool for Claire's greed. With a trembling breath, I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket. This was evidence. This was truth. And then I heard the unmistakable click of heels on hardwood. Claire. I slipped into the pantry just as she entered the kitchen, humming lightly to herself. I peeked through a sliver in the door. Watching her move with that same self-assured grace she carried like a uniform. She made herself tea, checking her phone between steps, smiling at whatever praise she was reading online. My blood simmered. She didn't know the world she built was already cracking. She didn't know I had the proof to bring everything down. But as I watched her sip tea in our mother's kitchen, I felt something unexpected. Not rage. Not hatred. Sadness. Deep, aching sadness. She was still my sister, the person I wanted to protect, the girl who used to sleep beside me after nightmares, gripping my hand until morning, the girl I loved before life. Ambition and ego hardened her into someone unrecognizable. How did we get here? How did she lose herself so completely? How did I let love blind me for so long? Claire set her cup down and sighed dramatically. I need to schedule another interview. She muttered. People love the homeowner angle. Homeowner. She said it like a trophy. I slipped out as quietly as I had come in, leaving through the back corridor while she remained absorbed in her reflection on her phone screen. Once outside, I pulled my hood over my head and hurried toward the street where my car was parked. For a moment, I paused and looked at the house, its windows glowing warmly against the night. This was no longer my home, but something inside me shifted. This wasn't defeat. This wasn't surrender. This was the beginning of justice. And karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives on quiet feet, through secret doors, carrying the truth like a blade, meant to carve reality back into rightful shape. The next step was finding legal support. Not every lawyer believed me. At first, contracts are contracts. After all, and Claire had made sure hers looked flawless. But when I presented the forged letters, inconsistencias, medical records, and Mom's documented cognitive decline at the time, certain authorizations were made. One attorney finally leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with interest. "This," he said, tapping the forged signature, "is fraudulent. And if we can prove she used your mother's incapacity to manipulate you into signing the rest, then your sister is in serious legal trouble." His words didn't bring joy. They brought relief. Relief that someone finally saw what I saw. Relief that I wasn't crazy. Or dramatic. Or emotional, as Claire liked to suggest. Relief that the truth had weight. Enough weight to pull her empire down. But I also knew Claire. She wouldn't go down without a fight. And I was ready. For once in my life, I was ready. The legal process began quietly. We filed motions, requested records, sent inquiries that would eventually reach Claire's inbox like a slow, creeping storm. She didn't respond at first, not directly. But the shift was noticeable online. Suddenly her posts felt more defensive, more curated. She began deleting old videos. She stopped mentioning the house so openly. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how much. Then came the day she finally confronted me directly. A text message. "We need to talk. Now." Another message minutes later. "I know what you're doing." A final one. "You're making a huge mistake." I stared at my phone, heart pounding, not from fear but from the calm certainty that I was finally on the right path. I typed back one word. No. No more being quiet. No more being manipulated. No more being erased. The line was drawn. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing behind Claire. I was standing up to her. The morning after I sent that single-word reply, no, I woke earlier than usual. Long before the sun had risen. The motel room was cold. But a strange energy thrummed beneath my skin. Like my body already knew that something irreversible had shifted. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, listening to the muted hum of passing cars outside, each one sounding like time pushing me forward toward an ending I couldn't yet see. Claire didn't text again. Not that day. Not the next. But silence from her was never comfortable. It always came with a cost. With a plan forming behind it. When Claire wasn't speaking, she was preparing, strategizing, positioning herself. So I waited, bracing for the backlash I knew was coming. And it did. Not through a message. Not through a call, but through a video. A polished, professionally edited segment she uploaded to her social channels. She titled it, "The Weight of Family Responsibility." I knew immediately it was about me. She sat in her staged living room, my mother's living room bathed in soft lighting, wearing a cream sweater that made her look gentle, almost fragile. The image was crafted perfectly. The way she always crafted her narratives. She talked to the camera in that steady, warm tone she used whenever she wanted to seem vulnerable. She spoke about the burden of being the responsible sibling. She spoke about making difficult choices to protect the family legacy. She spoke about rising to the occasion when others cannot. And then she said it. "I love my sister dearly. But she's always been emotional, sensitive, easily overwhelmed. It's not her fault. We're just very different. I had to step up when she couldn't. And I'll always do what's necessary to honor our parents' memory." My hands tightened on my phone until my knuckles whitened. She wasn't confronting me. She was preemptively defending herself, setting the narrative, framing me as unstable, fragile, incapable. It was brilliant in the most heartless way. And as I scrolled through the comments, praise for her strength, sympathy for her struggles, criticism of the unnamed emotional sister, I felt something inside me harden further. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Resolve. I had spent my entire life hiding my pain to protect her. This time, the truth would protect me. But I also understood something crucial. Exposing Claire wasn't just about proving she forged signatures or manipulated documents. It was about proving the pattern, the years of subtle coercion. Qui est exploitation. Emotional pressure, she used to shape the story in her favor. And that required more than paperwork. It required witnesses. People who had seen what I saw. People who had noticed the things I ignored. So I made a list. Not of enemies, but of those who had seen the cracks Claire tried so hard to plaster over. The first person I visited was Mrs. Klein, our former next-door neighbor. She had known us since we were children. She watched us grow up. Watched us crumble when Dad died. Watched my mother's decline. Watched me carry more weight than any one person should. When I knocked on her door, she greeted me with that familiar, warm smile. Though it faded quickly when she saw the exhaustion on my face. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling me into a gentle hug. "You look like you've been hurting for a long time." I swallowed hard. I have. We sat in her small living room, surrounded by the faint smell of lavender and old books. When I finally told her what was happening, what Claire had done, what I had discovered, her eyebrows knit together, and she shook her head in disbelief. "I knew something was off," she murmured. "I knew it. I remember the day Claire brought those forms for your mother to sign. Your poor mother could barely remember her own name that week. She was so confused. I asked Claire if everything was all right, and she brushed me off, said it was just routine paperwork. But her eyes, there was something cold about them. I'll never forget it." Her words were like a lifeline. "Would you be willing to make a statement?" I asked, voice trembling. "For the investigation?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course I will. Your mother wouldn't want this. She trusted you. Evelyn, everyone knew you were the one taking care of her." I didn't cry until I was back in my car, and once it started, the tears wouldn't stop. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being believed, of having someone finally validate the years of invisible work. Invisible love. Invisible pain. But I still needed more. Next, I met with Mrs. Ramirez, Mom's old caregiver who worked part-time in the final months of her life. She was quiet at first. Hesitant. Caregivers rarely wanted to get involved in family disputes. But when I showed her the dates on the forged letters and asked gently whether Mom had been capable of writing anything coherent at that time, her eyes widened in shock. "No," she said firmly. "No. Evelyn, your mother could not have written anything like this. She could barely hold a pen. She could barely remember you some days. I'm sorry. But this is not her handwriting. This is not real." She, too, agreed to testify. Piece by piece, the story began to build, not the one Claire told, but the truth she never expected anyone to chase. And then something unexpected happened. I received an email from a woman named Alina, a junior editor who worked at the production company Claire often filmed with. Her message was short, cautious, almost nervous. "I think I can help you. I've seen things. If you're willing to meet discreetly, I'll tell you everything." We met at a cafe far from the city center. She arrived wearing sunglasses and a scarf despite the warm weather, clearly terrified of being recognized. Once she sat down, she leaned forward and whispered, "I'm risking my job by talking to you." "Why?" I asked, gently. "Why help me at all?" She looked around, swallowed, and lowered her voice even more. "Because I've watched your sister for years. The way she talks about you off camera, the way she spins stories. She isn't who people think she is. And she's been preparing for this, whatever this is, for a long time. She rehearses narratives. She rehearses tears." Her hands trembled slightly as she took a sip of water. "I saw her forge a signature once. Not your mother's, someone else's. But I recognized the method. The way she traces over faint pencil marks. When I saw the document dates you mentioned in the news inquiry, I knew something was wrong." My breath caught. "Would you be willing to share what you know officially?" She hesitated, chewing on her lip. "Yes," she whispered, eventually, "but only anonymously. I'll give a statement. But I can't have my name attached publicly." It was more than I expected. More than I hoped. The evidence was piling up, and with every new piece, I could feel Claire's fabricated world beginning to fracture. But then, she struck back. Harder than ever. 3 days later, I received a call from the attorney handling my case. "Evelyn," Claire filed a counterclaim. My heart dropped. What kind of counterclaim? "She's claiming emotional harassment, psychological manipulation, She's requesting a restraining order. What? My voice broke. On what grounds? I haven't even spoken to her. He sighed heavily. She framed your investigation as stalking. She says you're unstable, volatile, that you've been obsessed with ruining her life since your mother passed. My stomach twisted violently. She's lying. I know, he said gently. But she's building a narrative. It won't hold if we continue gathering evidence. But Evelyn, she's escalating. She's scared. Scared. Good. She should be. But I also knew this wasn't over. Claire had always been her most dangerous when cornered. She would destroy herself before admitting defeat, which meant she would try to destroy me first. I sat on the motel bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the neon sign outside flickering softly. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Everything Claire built was fragile, paper thin, held together by lies and applause. I had something stronger. Truth, witnesses, evidence, and a lifetime of resilience she had always mistaken for weakness. The storm was coming. But this time, I wouldn't be the one breaking. I didn't know what kind of explosion to expect after Claire filed her counterclaim against me. I didn't know whether she would lash out publicly, disappear into silence again, or escalate things in ways I hadn't yet imagined. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. She was losing control. And when someone like Claire loses control, their world always cracks from the inside first. The first major shift came in the form of a single email, not from her attorney, not from a stranger, but from her manager, the woman who handled all her bookings, TV arrangements, brand partnerships, and sponsorships. Subject line: concern regarding Claire's statements. Inside was a short but telling message. I don't want to be pulled into a family matter, but I need you to be aware of something. Claire has been inconsistently describing events to us regarding her mother's estate. I think you may want to request access to her archived footage and unused interview takes. There are discrepancies. I read that email 3 times. Then 4 discrepancies. The one thing Claire tried hardest to hide was her inconsistencies. She relied on memorized monologues, rehearsed emotions, carefully curated expressions. She practiced crying in the mirror the way singers practice scales. But her biggest flaw was that she believed she could control every version of herself that existed. She forgot that cameras see everything, even the parts she discards. My attorney immediately requested those archived recordings, and within a week, we had them. Hours of unused raw footage clips never aired, never polished, never meant for public consumption. The first video we watched together felt like swallowing glass. Claire sat at the studio table, exhausted and annoyed, clearly unaware she was being recorded while waiting for the director's cue. The host asked casually, "So, how are you handling your mother's estate transition? Must be stressful." Claire rolled her eyes and snorted. "Oh, please. Evelyn practically handed everything to me. She was such a mess. I knew she'd cave. She always caves." My attorney paused the video and looked at me carefully. "That doesn't align with her public claim that she stepped up because you were overwhelmed." "No," I whispered. "No, it doesn't." Clip after clip, the image of devoted daughter and responsible sister shattered. In another segment, she laughed with the makeup artist and said, "Honestly, I'd be shocked if anyone believed Evelyn over me. She's too soft. Tô emocional. Can you imagine how she'd fall apart in a courtroom?" And there it was. The real Claire. The one I had protected for decades. The one who built herself on my silence. When we compiled the time-stamped inconsistencies, the forged documents, the witness statements, the archived footage, and the medical records proving Mom's incapacity, the case shifted from questionable to powerful. Still, none of that made me feel triumphant, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth Claire buried, the truth she painted over like fresh paint hiding mold, the truth of who my mother really was in her final days, and what she deserved. And I was determined to bring that truth to light. The court hearing took place on a gray morning in late October, the kind of day where the sky felt heavy and unyielding. I wore a simple black dress and an old necklace my mother had given me on my 21st birthday, the one I had almost lost when packing things into storage. As I stood outside the courthouse steps, my hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the gravity of everything leading up to this moment. Claire arrived minutes later. She stepped out of a sleek black car wearing an elegant pale lavender suit. Her hair pulled into a smooth bun. Her makeup flawless. Even there. Even in front of the courthouse. She treated the moment like a photo opportunity. Cameras clicked local reporters drawn in by her recent homeowner segments and rising popularity. She walked toward me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Ev," she said softly. "We don't have to do this." I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman standing before me was still beautiful. Still charismatic. Still captivating. But there was something different now. Something brittle beneath her polished exterior. "Yes," I said quietly. "We do." Her smile faltered for a split second. Just a split second. Then she composed herself and walked inside. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick. My heart hammered with every minute that passed. When the session began, Claire's attorney presented their narrative with precision that she acted responsibly. That I was unstable. That the house transfer was legal. That everything she did was to protect the family assets. Then it was our turn. My attorney stood, adjusted his glasses, and said 3 words that electrified the room. "We have evidence." He presented the forged letters first, then the medical records, then the testimony of Mom's caregiver, then the neighbor's account, then the financial inconsistencies, and finally, the archived footage. When the video played just 30 seconds of Claire mocking me, laughing about how easily she manipulated the situation, the courtroom went silent. Absolutely. Painfully silent. Claire's face turned a shade I had never seen before. Not red. Not pale. Something in between, like shock and humiliation, had collided inside her bloodstream. When the judge called for a recess, she rushed out of the courtroom without looking at me. For a moment, I stood motionless. The quiet chatter of reporters buzzed faintly around me. And then someone tapped my shoulder. "Mrs. Ramirez." The caregiver. She gave me a soft nod. "You did the right thing," she said. "Your mother would be proud." The words cracked something open in my chest. I didn't cry, not yet, but the pressure shifted. Lightened. Something inside me breathed again. After the recess, Claire didn't return to the courtroom alone. She came back with her attorney and her manager, though the manager didn't look like an ally anymore, more like someone watching a sinking ship with no inclination to drown with it. Before the judge resumed, Claire's attorney requested a private discussion. My attorney and the judge agreed. Minutes later, they emerged with a formal announcement. Claire wanted to settle. She wanted to avoid the rest of the footage. She wanted to avoid the headlines. She wanted to avoid the destruction of her brand. And she wanted to avoid the full legal consequences of forging incapacitated signatures. The settlement terms were strict. The house returned to me. The funds returned to me. The accounts reopened. Her claim dismissed. Her rights revoked. Her involvement severed. And she was required to make a recorded statement acknowledging her misconduct, not publicly broadcasted, but formal and legal. On file. When the judge asked me if I accepted the settlement, I exhaled slowly, my entire body trembling. I accept. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like triumph. But as I watched Claire sitting there, silent, stiff, her jaw clenched so tightly it trembled, all I felt was a deep, quiet sorrow. Not for what she did. For who she became. For the little girl I used to know. For the sister I once loved without question. For the family that had fractured long before the paperwork ever existed. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Illingard, Claire approached me one last time. Her voice was barely audible. "Are you happy now?" I looked at her, not with anger, not with revenge, but with something gentler and far more painful. "No," I whispered, "but I'm free." Her eyes flickered, maybe regret, maybe shock, maybe nothing at all, and then she walked away. She never looked back. Weeks passed. The house became mine again. Legally. Structurally. Spiritually. But restoring it wasn't about renovations. It was about reclaiming my parents' memory. I cleaned every room slowly. Tenderly. I repaired what had been neglected. I opened windows that hadn't been cracked in months. And one morning, as sunlight spilled across the living room floor, I realized something. Peace doesn't always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives with quiet acceptance. I learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing the person who hurt you. It's about releasing the weight they left in your hands. I forgave myself for trusting too long. I forgave myself for not seeing the signs. I forgave the version of me who broke under the pressure of being strong for everyone else. And as for Claire, I don't know if I can ever forgive her, but I can release her. Her choices belong to her. Her consequences belong to her. Her future belongs to her. Mine finally belongs to me. If you've ever been betrayed by family, if someone you loved twisted your trust, or if your story was rewritten without your permission, please remember this. You are allowed to reclaim your narrative. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to start again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you or made you feel understood in any way, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. And if you've ever lived through something like this, feel free to share your experience in the comments. You're not alone.